What's up, everybody? We're back on the Taylor Price Talk podcast, and I have a real special guest for you. This is a big treat. I've had this circled on my calendar for quite some time. He's a writer at The Athletic, the host of the GM Shuffle podcast, an owner of 3 Super Bowl rings, and the author of Gridiron Genius, a masterclass in winning championships and building dynasties in the NFL. You can, of course, follow him on Twitter at MLombardiNFL. Michael Lombardi, thank you so much for making the time. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Taylor. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
This is such a treat. So I worked with your son, Mick, at the 49ers. He was on Jim Harbaugh's coaching staff, and I was there for 8 years as a member of the front office working on the marketing team. And so definitely have some overlap in terms of our connection to the 49ers. You were there as a scout from 84 to 87. And so this is a relevant podcast for a lot of people that still are passionate about this team. And I'm curious how you look at their offseason, the growth that they've had, and where the program is at under year 3 with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch.
I think it's a huge year for them. I mean, look, the injury to Jimmy Garoppolo last year derailed it. I think what they've got to do is improve defensively. I mean, they gave up 28. They were 28th in the National Football League in offensive points allowed by their defense, which isn't going to be good enough. I mean, they're going to have to prove that they can slow some people down. And I think, there was a lot of pressure on whether he was going to keep the defensive coordinator or not. He decided to do that. I think it's really critical that they play better defense than they have in the past, which they have not been able to do. Their offense, I think, will be good. I just think to me, it's got to come down to their defensive front's got to play much better.
And they upgraded that front with Bosa in the draft and D Ford, and then adding Quan Alexander at linebacker. So they've really made the investment in free agency and the player development in the offseason to add to that front. Do you see those moves paying off? Are you a fan of Bosa and the combination of pairing him with Buckner and some of the players they have up front?
Well, I'm a big fan of defensive linemen. I think that's how you win the game. I think it's really critical to be able to control the defensive front. And I think the only way you can stop great quarterbacks in the NFL is really by your ability to rush the passer. I think coverage has to supplement rush, not rush supplement coverage. So I think it's really critical, and I think they've got to be able to pressure the quarterback with 4 or 5 or different combinations and then hold on in the back end. And look, if they can play from in front, when you've got a really good defensive line and you can play from in front, changes the game, because now all of a sudden your defensive call sheet's much more extensive. You're able to do more things defensively and not have to take a chance of perhaps blowing the game. So for the offense, I think they've got to get off to a fast start, and I think they've got to be able to play from in front to allow this pass rush to really be full force.
And Michael, it feels like a prove-it year for the 49ers. Several players, Solomon Thomas, Jerick McKinnon, Dante Pettis. There's examples of guys, even Garoppolo. We haven't seen a 16-game season from him. But at this stage of where the program is at, you don't get a lot of free passes. You know that Jed York wants to win. He is enamored with his coach and his GM. There seems to be a good core relationship there. But what seems to be the pressure or the prove-it aspect of this team, this franchise this year? How pivotal is year 3 in building a program to show sustained success in a competitive division?
Well, we know Kyle had a 6-year contract, so this is the 50-point mark. I mean, this is 50%. And the 49ers, let's be honest, the last 5 years have not been kind to this team whatsoever in terms of their win. They have not been able to show that they can come through. And, with under Jed's supervision, the team really, they haven't been able to show improvement. They haven't been able to show what they're capable of. I mean, they're 28th in the National Football League in wins in terms of the last. They're 31st in the NFL in wins over the last 5 years. They've only had 25 wins. I mean, that's right there is to me, every year from here on out is critical. Only Cleveland is a worse franchise than the 49ers in the last 5 seasons.
That doesn't sit well. Being a lifelong 49er fan, you don't want to be associated at the bottom of the rankings. It should be, signs of progression. And, of course, Garoppolo coming back, getting that full year with Kyle Shanahan and the offense. And so hopefully that is what we're all looking forward to, watching him play 16 games. Good or bad, we're going to learn a lot more about him. But you were up close with him, and you saw his development in New England. I'd love to know from your perspective, what makes Jimmy G so special? Maybe some of the intangibles that we don't get to see in the meeting room behind the scenes. What makes him such a special person?
Well, I think he can clearly command the room. I think the players like playing with him. I think there's no doubt he's got great leadership skills. He's a tough kid. He may make some mistakes along the way, but I think he can put them behind him. He's got the ability to make plays down the field, his accuracy down the field, and I think he's just going to get nothing but better and better as the more he plays. And I think this is a critical year for him as well. I mean, let's just put things in perspective. The 49ers have only won 25 games the last 5 years. Patriots have won 74. I mean, they've been lapped almost 3 times. So, this is so critical for them, and it starts with Jimmy, and it starts with their defense. But it all can't come down to Jimmy. He's got to find a better way to win. They've got to be able to control games, not just win games. People don't understand in the NFL. There's two things you have to evaluate at some point during the game: who's in control and who's in the lead. And sometimes you might win a game but never be in control. Teams that dominate, like the Patriots, like Seattle has, like the Rams have, they're in control of games.
Yeah, you look at the way they've had Jimmy G. They've had some success. The end of the season when he got traded from New England, 5-0, a lot of momentum, a lot of support around Garoppolo, almost like a budding face of the franchise and the young face of the NFL. And then this injury, this set him back. Some things didn't go his way. But you look at when he was on the field, Robbie Gould was an asset to them. They were able to have a reliable field goal kicker when they struggled in the red zone. George Kittle wasn't quite the threat that he is now. They're building up this team, but I'm just curious, have you ever seen a kicker hold out or command this sort of take it or leave it or give demands? And I'm curious if you feel like this is going to be an underrated aspect of this team, or do you think that they'll figure it out, get him in camp, get him signed, and work it out? Because it seems pretty preposterous to have a kicker threatening a holdout and getting that negative press going into a season.
Well, I think this. I think that the kicker realizes that the Bears are just lurking in the weeds to get them back. I mean, let's face it, the Bears know they need a kicker, and so when there's a marquee job open, you can play hardball. I mean, this is all about supply and demand. And so, even though he's been the franchise player and he wants more money, I think he's in a situation where he knows if they release him, he'll probably make more money.
Do you feel like the division might be down this year? Do you think the Niners can be competitive? Where do you see them, obviously competing and having meaningful games in December? Being in that wild card bunch is going to be a good sign of progress for this team. But do you see that being a realistic chance, potentially the Rams having a Super Bowl hangover, or do you feel like there's still so much room for them to climb to even be competitive in the NFC?
I think, the Todd Gurley injury spells a little bit of a concern for the Rams. I think where will they be defensively? I think that's got to be a concern. And look, Jared Goff, when he gets pressure inside, it's always a problem. But look, the Rams have been very good. They've been able to move the football effectively in the last 2 seasons with Sean McVay. Goff has played better as the year went on. Now, he didn't play very well in cold weather, but I do think they're vulnerable because they don't have a drop back pass game. I mean, their whole thing is play action pass, and the reason it works so well is because Gurley was so effective. Now, without Gurley, they're going to have to find it out. Now, whether it's going to be the kid they drafted, Henderson, or whether it's going to be Malcolm Brown or someone else, we'll see. But we know Gurley's not going to be able to stay healthy.
Yeah, so the Niners' progress on the defensive side of the ball, getting Garoppolo back in the mix, and potentially some injury issues in the other teams, that could boost them up and make them competitive. A lot to play out, and definitely an exciting time as we approach training camp. But there is a lull in the NFL schedule right now, or in the season. Not much is happening. So I'm curious from just maybe a management perspective, how does executives spend their time, coaching staff spend their time in July, knowing that this grind, this marathon is upon them? How do they get ready for the season?
Well, I think it's, this is, from July 10th from June 10th to July 15th. I mean, I think everybody's taking downtime and relaxing. I think once it starts July 15th, it kicks back up. Most all the teams are ready to go in terms of their practicing plan, and they're ready to hit the ground running. The OTA days have worked out. So this is really about getting your rest and getting caught up.
I've mentioned to you, and when I listen to your podcast, the GM Shuffle, you love to reference Al Davis, do impersonations of him. You talk about Bill Walsh and those memories, and just how fortunate or how special of it do you feel that the people that you have crossed paths with in the NFL, starting with Bill Walsh. I'd love to talk a little bit about that and what those recollections or those memories that maybe you hold on to, and when it's top of mind, people say talk about Bill Walsh. Where does your mind go to first?
I think I wrote the book Gridiron Genius really as a tribute to what I learned from working for the man. I mean, he was an incredible leader. He was an incredible visionary. He had the ability to build a culture within an organization that few people understand. And frankly, with only 25 wins the last 5 years, you can't say the 49ers have been able to duplicate his culture within their own building. So, the first thing that comes to mind is his standard of performance, things that he wanted from everybody within the organization, and he expected you to do it.
There's a lot of great books and how he treated everyone and even, the support staff and the different ways he went out of his way to make people feel part of it, the bigger picture. And I love that leadership point, and it's definitely any references, whether it's your book, Gridiron Genius, or other books about Bill Walsh, definitely take a look and read it. It's special times. With Dwight Clark's passing, it's been tough. That not having that part of the 49er family still with us, but I feel like the team does a great job of recognizing the greats and honoring those who paved the way, so to speak. I'd love to know maybe your favorite players when you think back on the 49ers and which guys in the locker room you kind of have a special place for in your heart.
There's so many. The one thing I think I've learned in my career, and it's been a fairly long time, is great teams had great people in their locker room. And from Ronnie Lott to Joe Montana to Eric Wright, Tina Turner, those guys were really good people, and I loved all of them. Dwight, unfortunately, has left us, but Randy Cross, John Ayers, who's passed away as well. There's some really incredibly, really nice people that as a young scout started out his career, they were very kind to, and I look back on that. And then when I went to the Patriots, I had the same feeling. The players were good people. And sometimes you don't get that sense when you're with other teams. And I think that's the one thing that I'll always remember about my time at the 49ers. There's a lot of good guys on that team.
Yeah, I always remember when I got a chance to interview them or be around them at different events, I was more excited to talk to them than I was about Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, and those guys. And no disrespect, but there's something about just the legacy and the way that they won and the impact that they had in the community. Being, San Francisco first team, first professional sports franchise, the Niners are big business in the Bay Area. And, maybe segueing out of that is that the Raiders are leaving the Bay Area, which is a tough thing, but there's a lot of intrigue. And I know you like to talk about what's going on with Oakland, with Gruden, with Antonio Brown, Hard Knocks. I would love to share with you an Al Davis story that, from my perspective, because I know you'd like to do impersonations, and it's so vivid and also brings you back to those moments. But I was at training camp in 2010 in Napa, as you've wonderfully described in many of your podcasts, and the Niners were scrimmaging a joint training camp practice, and Jamarcus Russell threw 5 interceptions in one red zone team period. And I was in the end zone. I ran over there to take notes, and I was watching the play unfold, and I heard from behind, get out of the way, get out of the way. And I turned around, it was Al Davis, Mr. Davis, I should humbly, respectfully say. He was in his cart, motioning me to get out of his way. I was blocking his view, and you could imagine the fear and the trepidation I had knowing that I was blocking this man's view at his facility. So definitely an impact person in the game, and we're grateful that what he did a lot for the game of football, and I'd love to know your sort of takeaways on what Mr. Davis instilled in you.
Well, look, you had to be well prepared to talk to him on the conversation. You had to know coaching. You had to know players. He forced you to learn players and plays, which is critical. And by doing that, you were able to expand your knowledge. The reason I went to work for him was because Bill Walsh said one time, he said, hey, the most football I ever learned in my life was working for Al Davis. And so I knew I had to work for Al Davis at some point. But, just his intensity, he often would tell me, kid, the NFL is not a place you work in. The NFL is a place you live in, and you have to live it every single day.
Yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on the Gruden era, and especially just, is it bittersweet that they're leaving the Bay Area, or how do you see this year playing out? Because the program that they've built, to me, just from my perspective, is a pretty fascinating one, where they're recycling or bringing in different parts that may be discarded other places. Vontaze Burfict, Richie Incognito, Antonio Brown, and it's almost back in true Raider fashion, where it's almost like this renegade building of people don't think it's going to work, but we'll make it work because we believe in ourselves. So that cockiness or sort of that Raider mentality seems to be how they're assembling this team.
Twofold. I think the Raiders leaving Oakland is disappointing, but I think it was something that they had to do. Look, that Las Vegas market was just so tempting. I can't believe that it took this long for a team to go to Las Vegas. It's just incredible financial windfall for them, and I'm sure the Rams or the Chargers regret it. They think the Raiders ended up being the third team to take a deal. They'll end up being the team that makes the most money. in terms of Gruden and Mayock, in terms of what they're doing, I think it's anti of what Al's always done. To draft a guy fourth overall in the draft who never run a 40 time is somewhat, outside the norm of what the Raiders believe in. But, look, during his career and as things have gone on, they haven't been as successful. And so I think, when you talk about teams that haven't won very much, the Raiders have only won 32 games in the last 5 years. 7 games better than the 49ers, but still haven't been very good. And I think that's one of the reasons why you got to try to do things differently.
Yeah, you mentioned Farrell. I was, he reminded me a lot of Aldon Smith, and maybe didn't have the power numbers or the speed, but the body type, the length. I'll be curious to see how he plays this year, especially with him and Bosa not being grouped together in terms of the rankings, but also just that perception of that they were drafted in the top the draft and in the same market. So there'll be a lot of conversations about how they're progressing, and Farrell, the leadership aspect, maybe that was a big draw too, because it seemed like there's nothing but rave reviews from the mentality or the way he led by example at Clemson.
Yeah, well, look, leading at Clemson and being a dominant pass rusher in the NFL and going fourth overall, you're going to make an impact on your team. And I think Farrell's a really good player. I think just in terms of value of where they picked him, I would have a hard time understanding it.
Yeah, as the saying goes, no scholarships in the NFL. They will discard you pretty quickly. And so we see Solomon Thomas had that high draft status, and he's, I wouldn't say on the bubble, but he's definitely have his work cut out for him at this training camp.
He's on the bubble. There's really no position for him to play. The problem is he's a base end on first down, and he can't rush inside on third on passing downs. So he's really kind of an in-between player. He's like a basketball player that doesn't have a spot to play, and you can't be one-dimensional. And I think that, that draft, look, the 49ers don't take Mahomes. They don't take Deshaun Watson. They end up saving themselves for Kirk Cousins, and they get bailed out with the Jimmy Garoppolo deal. We'll find out if Jimmy can stay healthy.
Yeah. Lastly, I would love to touch a little bit about your time with New England and Bill Belichick. I was listening to Julian Edelman's appearance on the Part of My Take podcast, which you have been a guest on, one of the top podcasts in sports. And just it was interesting to hear Julian's the way he talked about the Patriots and being disliked, but that's not a problem because they are respected. And I love that aspect of that. You could be mad at them for winning every game or being in the AFC Championship every year, but you have to respect it. And seeing that with the Warriors, the way that people outside of the Bay Area have been, anti-Warriors, we're glad Toronto won, but you have to respect the way it was built and done the right way. And I'm curious from your perspective, when you hear that sentiment or you've experienced when there's that Patriots backlash, that maybe as a former member of the franchise and winning a Super Bowl ring, that you wear it as a badge of courage that we did it the right way and we gave them a reason to be mad at us.
Yeah, look, everybody's good. When you win 74 games and the next closest competition is 57, you're dominating the league. I'm not sure anybody cares about. I don't think anybody in New England cares who likes them or not. I think they can ignore it, and I think they're more than happy to go on with life that way. I think that they know they can dominate the league. They have been able to. They've been very effective.
From a general sense, what's it like being in a room with Bill Belichick? What's that experience like when you're face to face talking through a scenario? How much of I don't want to say a thrill because you've been around all the top voices and minds of the NFL, but maybe what makes him stand out, or what makes those moments that you relish in your career?
Well, Bill and I go back to New England. We go back to our Cleveland days together, and I think that there's no doubt that when you're in the room with Bill, you learn an awful lot, and you have to be prepared to answer the questions, and it's just an ongoing knowledge. It's his perspective of the game that's so unique, and it forces you to think differently. Much like Coach Walsh, he sees the game clearer than most people. He understands the secret to victory is the organization of the non-obvious, and he's able to organize it, and I think he does a really good job with that.
Michael, I'll leave you with this. We're approaching training camp. A lot can change with teams based on injuries, player movement. Things can happen. There's always teams that come out of nowhere, surprise, teams that disappoint. I'd love to know the players, teams, storylines that you're most intrigued by and that you're going to be watching this year as it plays out.
Well, I think we all have to watch Cleveland and see what happens there with Odell. I've never seen a team that talks as much as they do and comes out and wins. I think that. And then secondly, I think It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with Kansas City in this Tyreek Hill situation. He met with the investigators today for over 8 hours. He gets suspended. How does that affect the team? And I think there's always going to be a team that rises. Is it Buffalo? Is Josh Allen going to improve? Does Buffalo take a giant step and become a playoff caliber team? I think those are the storylines you always want to look at. And then to me, the number one thing, and I think Ben Roethlisberger will have a great season. I think he's a potential MVP candidate this year, and I think the Steelers will really turn it around.
What well said. What a treat. Really appreciate your time and the wisdom. And make sure you follow at Michael Lombardi, M Lombardi NFL on Twitter, and check out the GM Shuffle podcast on iTunes, everywhere you listen to podcasts. It's great insight. And all season long, look forward to listening to you and At Van Kirk breaking it all down. It's going to be awesome. Thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Taylor. Bye-bye.